If you were taught that the Bible describes a solitary God ruling alone, you were taught a simplified version of the story. The older tradition is far stranger and far more dangerous. Psalm 82 opens not with worship, but with an accusation. God stands in the midst of a divine assembly and judges other gods, not idols, not metaphors, rulers. The text assumes the audience already knows who they are. The question is why no one talks about them. This worldview is called the Divine Council. It formed the backbone of ancient Israelite theology, long before later creeds flattened the supernatural world. Yahweh is supreme, uncreated, eternal, unrivaled, but he is not solitary. Surrounding him are the sons of God, heavenly beings created to administer divine authority. They are not human souls, not angels in the modern sense, and not poetic abstractions. In Hebrew, they are the bene Elohim, a term used consistently for non-human members of the heavenly realm. Job chapters 1 and 2 show them assembling before Yahweh in formal session. They report, they are questioned. Authority exists, but accountability remains. Even Satan appears here, and not yet the horned villain of later tradition, but a prosecutorial figure operating within the council structure. This is governance, not chaos. Second Temple Jewish texts expand this picture. The book of Jubilees describes angels assigned to nations and peoples. First Enoch speaks of watchers entrusted with oversight who abandon their post and corrupt humanity. These texts were not fringe, they shaped how Jews in the time of Jesus understood the unseen world. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserve the same assumptions. Heaven is organized, populated, and politically active. Deuteronomy 32 reveals the system's origin. In its oldest Hebrew form, preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it states that when the Most High divided the nations after Babel, he fixed their boundaries according to the number of the sons of God. Humanity was placed under heavenly administrators. But Israel was withheld. Yahweh's portion is his people. This was not favoritism, it was strategy. Rabbinic tradition quietly preserves echoes of this belief. Early Jewish commentary speaks of 70 angelic princes over the 70 nations, each accountable to God. The nations had guardians. Israel answered directly to the king. This arrangement was meant to bring order, but power reveals loyalty, and loyalty failed. Psalm 82 records the collapse. God summons the council not to instruct but to indict. The rulers of the nations have ruled unjustly. They protect the powerful, crush the weak, and abandon their mandate. The experiment is over, judgment is coming, and the sentence will not stay in heaven. This worldview also explains something modern readers often miss: why the Bible treats the nations as hostile entities rather than neutral populations. In the Hebrew scriptures, nations are not merely collections of people. They are spiritual jurisdictions. Prophets do not only condemn kings, they challenge the unseen powers behind thrones. This is why Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel speak to beings far greater than human rulers, using language that exceeds earthly categories. The divine council framework made sense of suffering on a global scale. Why did entire civilizations descend into violence, ritual abuse, and empire-building cruelty? The answer was not ignorance, it was influence. When heavenly administrators abandoned justice, corruption flowed downward into culture, law, and worship. Human kings imitated their unseen patrons. Apocryphal literature preserves this idea with unsettling clarity. In First Enoch, humanity is not merely sinful, it is exploited. Forbidden knowledge is distributed strategically. Warfare, sorcery, and domination are taught as systems, not accidents. These narratives assume a world where rebellion begins above and manifests below. Even early Jewish mysticism reflects this tension. Heavenly ascents described in texts like 3 Enoch portray layered realms of authority, ranks of rulers, and a throne room guarded not by silence, but by fear. Heaven is not serene, it is ordered, monitored, and volatile. Power is constantly evaluated. This makes Psalm 82 explosive. God does not merely criticize behavior, he announces the collapse of a governing system. The sons of God were meant to reflect divine justice to the nations. Instead, they became tyrants. The courtroom scene is not symbolic, it is administrative. Heaven's hierarchy is being dismantled. If the gods of the nations were condemned, then allegiance to them was dangerous. Worship was no longer cultural. It was treason against the true king. Every idol temple represented loyalty to a failing regime. The divine council was never meant to rule forever. It was provisional, and now its time has run out. What follows is not reform, but replacement. Psalm 82 delivers a verdict no ancient reader would misunderstand. The sons of God are condemned for systemic injustice. These are not personal failures. You are gods, God declares, sons of the Most High, all of you. Their status is acknowledged, then revoked. You will die like men. Immortality is stripped away. Divine rulers are sentenced to mortality. This theme reverberates across apocalyptic literature. In First Enoch, rebellious watchers are bound, judged, and await destruction. Jubilees speaks of spirits condemned to roam in limitation until final judgment. These are not myths about monsters. They are narratives about failed governance. Even the Talmud preserves fragments of this memory. Discussions of angelic princes over nations appear alongside warnings that these powers accuse, mislead, and demand worship. Idolatry is not described as ignorance, but as misplaced allegiance. To worship another god is to empower a condemned ruler. The consequences unfold through history. If the nations were governed by corrupt heavenly authorities, then oppression was inevitable. Empires rose under unseen influence. Violence and injustice were not accidents of human evolution. They were symptoms of a broken administration. This explains why Psalm 82 ends with a plea. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Authority must be reclaimed. The old system cannot be repaired, it must be replaced. Later biblical texts show the resistance. Daniel describes angelic princes contending over empires, delaying judgment, resisting transition. These powers know their fate. They fight anyway. The story moves toward consolidation. What was divided at Babel is reversed. The nations will no longer be ruled by lesser powers. The divine council is dismantled. One kingdom replaces all. Psalm 82 is the key to understanding why evil persists despite reform, why justice fails despite law, and why redemption requires more than education. The problem was never only human. The fall of the divine council marks the end of an age. The throne stands uncontested. And the rulers who once governed the world fade into history, judged, stripped of power, and remembered only in forbidden texts and half-forgotten traditions. What follows this declaration is not immediate peace, but prolonged fallout. Judgment is pronounced, yet enforcement unfolds across generations. Apocalyptic tradition understood this delay as intentional. Their authority decayed while resistance intensified. History becomes the battleground where a fallen administration struggles against its inevitable replacement. Second Temple texts describe this era as one of transition and conflict. The War Scroll from Qumran tells of forces aligned with earthly nations, clashing under banners unseen by human eyes. These writings assume Psalm 82 as settled law. The war that follows is enforcement. Rabbinic sources preserve subtle traces of this worldview. Certain passages speak of heavenly prosecutors who continue to accuse humanity even after their judgment, clinging to influence through deception rather than authority. Power shifts from rule to manipulation. Dominion gives way to propaganda. The gods no longer reign openly. They whisper. This shift explains a crucial transformation in the biblical narrative. Idolatry evolves. Early nations worship visible gods tied to land and temple. Later empires weaponize ideology, law, and fear. The unseen rulers adapt. Their goal is no longer governance, but obstruction. Delay becomes strategy. The prophets understood this. When they condemned nations, they addressed more than kings. They spoke as if foreign powers were listening. Their language stretches beyond human rulers because their audience did. Judgment had moved upward. Resistance remained below. Apocryphal traditions preserve a final expectation. The condemned rulers will not simply fade away. They will be publicly displaced. Their authority will be absorbed, centralized, and redistributed. The nations will no longer belong to intermediaries. The Most High will reclaim direct rule. This is why the closing plea of Psalm 82 matters. It is a legal demand for enforcement. Judge the earth is a call for transfer of authority. Inherit the nations signals consolidation. What was divided after Babel is being reversed. The divine council was never eternal. It was temporary governance under probation. Psalm 82 announces the end of that probation. Heaven's experiment with delegated rule is terminated. What remains is not chaos, but convergence. One throne, one authority, one kingdom without rivals. And the unseen rulers who once shaped the destiny of nations become relics of a fallen age only discussed in whispers, preserved in forbidden texts, and remembered as a warning that even the divine are accountable to justice.